So I was playing some Total Warhammer as my favourite faction, the Empire of... I was thinking a lot about Karl Franz, so I decided to check the Games Workshop website. What I saw, dear viewer, sent chills down my blood to the very core. What the...
Female! These are real bad times, bro. We got women talking back. We got people playing stringed instruments.
That's just a bit of satire for you. I was exaggerating an opinion I don't agree with. Though I probably needn't explain that, Warhammer fans are finely attuned to the ways of satire. Look at these caustic satirists playing their ludicrous characters without breaking kayfabe. Truly, we walk in the footsteps of Gargants. Now, contrary to the nuanced criticisms you may have seen, Age of Sigmar is pretty good. People especially tend to write off the game's protagonist faction, the Stormcast Eternals, but there's a lot about them which is worth discussing. And no, I'm not just doing this video to annoy reactionaries. As the name implies, Stormcast Eternals are... Wait, what the fuck does it imply? That they're copyrightable? Oh, right. Yeah, as the name implies, they are created beings, the product of mortal souls being whisked away upon death to be imbued with elemental magic on Sigmar's Anvil of Apotheosis. So, Stormcast, resin cast if you're on the cheap. These storm soldiers sally forth, all storm syntholed up, and if slain, their soul shoots back to Sigmar for swift reswolling. Reforging which has zero downsides, guaranteed. It's a more interesting setup than the genetic determinism of a different variety of giant armoured warriors. Because when you have storm hosts built around individual gimmicks, you know, posh, scary, sporty, baby, ginger, it's more compelling when these groups coalesce around lived experience, rather than having your 10-foot daddy's steak preference eugenically encoded. Silly as Hogwarts houses are, they aren't based on phrenology. Well, unless the hat was hiding calipers. And that's the Stormcast, semi-divine beings armed with a variety of weapons such as hammers, trumpets, hammers, and I
will lamp you with a lamp.
Now, we've been talking around the elephant in the room. In Age of Sigmar parlance, that would be drunk face grey stompies in the room. The Stormcast are pretty similar to another iconic poster boy of a decade-spanning sci-fi property. Jean-Luc Picard. Bold, rebooted, liberal, we'll get to that. You might know that an Inside Out Kirk mask gives you Michael Myers, but did you know an Inside Out Picard mask gives you a Stormcast? And a pile of Inside Out Trek masks gets J.J. Abrams to green light, Kurtzman and Orsi to burn, and Benedict Cumberbatch to star as the Ashes. Okay, so Space Marines. Some consider Stormcast to be Marine knockoffs. And I mean, I can see why people confuse them. After all, Space Marines are like...
That humans could fight alongside aliens was repugnant. They may not have heard of the Emperor, but that doesn't excuse this, said Solomon. It should be self-evident that associations with alien filth can only end badly. It was our manifesto when we joined the Crusade. Suffer not the alien to live.
While Stormcast are like...
Porthos ambled towards her, bouncing a steaming potato on one palm. He took a bite and chewed noisily. A potato is a potato, whatever the weather.
The very subtle point I'm making is that Stormcast... did you get that? And yeah, 40k started out as an absurdist satire of fascism. Turns out this is a kind of shaky tonal foundation on which to build a toy soldier company. I'm sure there's some kid out there painting their dreadnought in the disdainful spirit of Juvenal. The other kids just won't play with him. The Horatian thugs! So, GW substitutes the early absurdism for grimdark and a massively skewed narrative point of view, and while alignment isn't allegiance, all I'm saying is you can't idealise your cake and satirise it. Age of Sigmar lore in this respect is a less unstable text, though it has its own
paradigm shift.
Where 40k space Nazis drifted from caricature to moral ambiguity, Stormcast start on the opposite end. In universe, they debut as a last gasp of resistance against chaos hegemony. It was a little out there. Many felt that demigods duking it out in dramatic, Dali-esque dioramas lacked day-to-day context. And that's not to say the early lore was bad, it's just that the leap from testosterone Tolkien to the Mayan, the Kitsch and the Flat Globe would have benefited from situating the ordinary people of the mortal realms. There's a common view that AOS ditched its excessively noble bright tone for Grimdark. After all, the game launched with Bloodreaver models, desperate captives coerced into cannibalism. Fucking kid shit. It is hard to dispute that Stormcast seem grittier than they used to be, but that doesn't get into the why. The tonal shift was not because their concept was changed, like using boot polish as sandwich spread, but because they were recontextualized by a change to the milieu, like leaving boot polish with Justin Trudeau. Now that the Age of Sigmar timeline has moved a few centuries forward, Stormcasts aren't just struggling to find purchase in an apocalyptic hellscape, but have helped establish civilizations across the realms. More like Age of Society. The fact they're then tasked with exerting Sigmar's political authority adds the moral complication. They're enforcing a liberal hegemony, with all that entails. Well, that's my takeaway.
So really you've got this great kind of haunted world where legends and myths and gods and monsters, they do exist and they do prowl around in the edges. But in the cities, maybe they've forgotten that, which is quite fun to play around with.
I wonder as well if maybe some of the original Age of Sigmar stuff was Sigmar's propaganda. When you look at the Stormcast Eternals, when they first look lovely, they look resplendent and shiny.
Indeed.
And then you look at the Stormcast Eternal on the cover of the latest Battle Tome, that looks like a more realistic presentation.
I mean, I thought the narrative ramifications of the tonal shift end up emphasising the inherent contradictions of a liberal hierarchy in an interesting way. But sure, we can go with unreliable narrator. Does that mean the rules are propaganda too? Sorry mate, think you'll find that 4+ save as media disinformation? Please read Chomsky. Here's an unbiased war scroll for you to use instead. You know, all the talk of Age of Sigmar lore lacking everyday humanity leaves out the fact that Stormcast are humanity. Again, they aren't bred, they're reforged. These are people who died defending their homes against invaders. They come from every conceivable background, gender, era. There's even some hints they aren't just human only either. Speaking of gender, reforging mortal souls into idealised versions of themselves has a pretty baked in opportunity for trans representation. So when's that subtext becoming text then? Calling them all proletarian heroes is probably a bit far when you've got the Tempest Lords, former royalty and supposedly the most inspirational storm host, which is a take. But ultimately, the Stormcast are a diverse coalition fighting for liberation, so I guess the Blue Bloods can be buds. Well, just as long as they aren't feeling too honourable. As for the free cities, they are true melting pots. It's amazing the kind of multicultural societies you get when you have to cram 5 old armies into one battle tome. When you're tolerant. Clearly there's been a mandate to spare the kind of racism and sexism some claim enhances the verisimilitude of fantasy settings. Bro, how can you expect me to buy the gritty realism of the Dragon Tick Chronicles if the girls get speaking roles? Arguing against diverse representation is silly, and even more so with Warhammer, which is foremost a sandbox that provides the diegetic context for homebrew. Having the protagonist faction be canonically no girls allowed would be like a colouring book forbidding the colour blue. We've had the Stormcast potatoes. Now let's move on to the bad vibes, okay? For starters, Sigmarite cities are feudal technocracies, and class inequality is rife. If only there was a multicultural faction that rejected wealth inequality, held free elections to their leaders to serve the common good, and was greater recycling. But there's also the Stormcast approach to isolationism and intervention. Sigmar's military power was curtailed in the Age of Chaos, but then Sigmar chooses to seal Azir, leaving refugees to fend for themselves. Only after 500 years of focus grouping did the Stormcast strike back, and so warred against the descendants of those that Sigmar had abandoned, who then subsequently joined Chaos. The rise of Chaos in both 40k and AOS often represents a culmination of resentment towards an unjust society, a demonic co-option of valid revolutionary impulse. This is what the left calls false consciousness, and the right calls lucrative. Unlike in 40k, AOS at least presents a valid route for de-radicalization, including a cool subplot about Redeemed, former Chaos Warriors turned Stormcast. Nevertheless, you have echoes of the Imperium chauvinism emerge, with native Chaos-aligned tribes being displaced by Sigmar's expansion, or certain less cuddly storm hosts perpetrating purges of civilians whose rebellion was explicable by their circumstances. So, mixed bag. Sigmar ain't quite doing East India Company shit, but it is colonialism. Oh wait, I have something for this. Franz Fanon? Huh? Right? Yeah? I guess if you want the Chaos threat to be a permanent fixture of the setting, it makes sense for the protagonists to be liberals rather than leftists, since a lack of class critique or advanced dialectics means they're ill-equipped to address the underlying issues that fuels reaction. Recent lore has had Chaos take a step back, so Nagash can share the spotlight as antagonist, and his dispute with Sigmar over souls turns a metaphysical concept into the basis of a labour market. Longtime frenemies, Sig and Nag have a history of alliances going sour, and I know I've been adamantly calling Stormcast liberals, but their reluctance to accept Nagash as an enemy really does cast them as leftists hesitant to deal with lib wreckers.
I dislike burning temples, brother. Even ones devoted to Nagash. Peaceful as the adherents of Nagashmore are, sooner or later, they would have made the wrong choice. To serve their god, you mean? They will rebuild. They always do. I've burned that temple 8 times in the past 80 years, brother. They keep rebuilding it, and they invite me to the first service they hold, each time. Do you go? Every time.
Yeah, mixing metaphors. Corbyn's no lib, though maybe he was too nice to deal with the wreckers. It's also unfair to compare Blair to Nagash, which would imply Blair stood for anything. And that's the political identity of Stormcast. The fact they aren't fash is a tolerable foundation on which to build a protagonist point of view, while the Imperialism undercuts their moral authority in a way that still yields interesting narrative conflict. And aside from being complicit in maintaining the status quo, being a Stormcast sounds pretty good. You get invited to temple openings, you have a Chaos 12-step recovery program, you get to be eternal. Hey, wait, what's the asterisk? I don't remember that asterisk. Oh no.
Every day, quite a big part of me dies forever. I feel like my soul is being chipped away bit by bit.
Welcome to the world of work.
Porthos.
Okay, so I sort of buried the lead with this one. Truth is, while there are under-examined aspects of the Stormcast worth discussing, I wouldn't have cared enough to make this if that's all there was to the perma-pouting carb loaders. Flawed reforging is what ties it all together. The Stormcast find themselves gradually degraded, diminished, depreciated, other D-words. Yeah, it's potentially a plot device to let your characters lose and still return, kind of convenient if you're selling models of them, but you gotta respect such a well-integrated story solution. You assume Stormcast are glorious super beings, but then they're subjected to copy after copy, each time the memory of the original drifting further and further into oblivion. To be reforged is to become simulacrum. That's right kids, AOS got both flavours. We got Ard boys, we got Baudrillard boys. This deterioration of the self is bitterly ironic because, that's what they were chosen for in the first place. As I said, Stormcast differ from Space Marines in that they aren't a product of genetic engineering and conditioning. They more resemble Chaos Warriors in that they've been elevated because of their actions. The path of Chaos in Warhammer has always been compelling. It's almost like the pursuit of happiness if Will Smith becomes a demon at the end instead of a stockbroker. I guess it's not that different. But yeah, Chaos is all about the grind. This is Or. Or worships Chaos. Or works hard. Or is rewarded and becomes the first demon prince. Be like Or. By the way, credit to 9th Age for this excellent bit of art representing the path of Chaos. Hey, I wonder why 9th Agers dislike Stormcast. Of course, Chaos's meritocracy is about as legitimate as it is in real life. While some mortals work their way up to Khorne's demonic aristocracy, more likely you're a precarious blood reaver, lacking the opportunity to progress. It's a real rat race, and say what you will about Skaven, but at least they have unions. Sigmar's recruitment process isn't quite the same grotesque bootstraps bonanza. He headhunts those who have demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice themselves and defend their people. It's the old Captain America thing of bestowing power on the most virtuous candidate, and considering that, the flawed reforging offers a spin on the classic corruption trope. Fantasy stories often centre on a spiritual rift that breaks down as a factional conflict. Imperium loyalists versus Chaos traitors, light side Jedi versus dark side Sith, powerlifters versus curl bros. If the Stormcast are like Captain America, it's not the Captain America corrupted by Hydra, but one struggling with CTE, just like real America. No, stop that. Okay, we're already walking a tonal tightrope and making light of the contradiction of AOS's noble bright paladins suffering grim existential horror without using real cognitive disorders for edgy analogies, okay? Okay. Maybe better to move on to another reference point. The original edgy boy, Consonant King, his Übermensch concept is associated with Nazis, kind of unfairly, though whether or not the idea is even worth rehabilitating is its own discussion. Point is, the Stormcast are much truer versions of the Übermensch than Space Marines, being as they are chosen for Ascension because they exercise their will to power to fight against chaos and defend their communities. As Stormcast, the task of humanitarian liberation is intertwined with an individualist mission for existential meaning. This is exemplified in the Knight Questor role, a sanctioned leave for Stormcast to do some self-care adventuring with full autonomy. I mean, look at this dangerous iconoclast, he's left-handed. There is a lot about the Stormcast which does not fit the Übermensch ideal. For one, they're certainly more Apollonian than Dionysian. Warhammer is kinda puritanical about that. Slanesh. But the main thing is the reforging, which instead evokes Nietzsche's eternal recurrence thought experiment. The idea that, if one was to live out their life infinitely, repetitiously, one would have to struggle to overcome ressentiment, powerless, paralysing antipathy towards this existence. You can see the irony of how this is very literal for the Stormcast, each link in the death and rebirth chain removing a portion of their humanity. What was a collective of ideologically committed individuals becomes a passive conduit of Sigmar's will. It's a process of numbing and deadening the internalization of ressentiment. We can talk about slave morality, or Chaos' slaves to darkness, but Stormcast spiritually end up slaves to Sigmar. So the tragic dehumanization of Stormcast sorta humanizes them? Oh come on, you can do better than that. We looked at how their role shifts from defending the downtrodden to enforcing the Sigmarite state, and though their parallel alienation of the self isn't an excuse, it does recontextualize their plight. And that's not to say the cost of reforging plot point was a late addition, it was hinted at day one, and the narrative has followed through. For all their meat and potatoes, protagonist faction baggage, the Stormcast remain interesting. It's the contradiction between appearing as paragons of humanity, while slowly becoming humanity's, well, leftovers.
Everybody is wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody is worrying about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. Think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say once you're gone forever, and some say you're gonna come back. Some say you rest in the arms of the Savior who fits in the ways you lack. Some say that they're coming back in a garden, bunch of carrots and little sweet peas. I think I'll just let the mystery be. I think I'll just let the mystery be.
What are you doing?
Look, see, memories are wounds in the psyche, little spirit. They leave deep scars and tell stories. You were born in this realm, as all living things are born only to die, and you recognized that truth in your torment. You sought to find peace in the dark of creation's light. Was that not your right? Did you not deserve it? You served and fought and died, and now only desired peace, silence, oblivion. Not to burn and become someone new, someone else. But they would not stop. Again and again and again. They tried to drag you back. They took those you loved from you. And then, when that was not enough, they sought to take all memory of them, to leave you empty, save for the storm. Bow and become greater than that which was lost. Bow, and justice will be yours.
Will I forget them?
Bow and see again the faces of the forgotten. Now sleep and be made whole.
That was a bit of a detour, huh? I hope all of you Warhammer Leftovers fans had fun. You know, that famously huge niche? I would recommend reading Soul Wars, from which I've cribbed a fair bit in this video. It's got a pretty conventional Two Towers plot structure, but delves into Stormcast internal strife in a way which puts similar dynamics in the Horus Heresy novels to shame. The 30k books are a little hamstrung by the fact that the Chaos Gods are tempting the super powerful Primarchs with more power. Sure, sounds nice, but lacks emotional heft. Like, I've hit a 3-plate squat, what the hell is Chaos gonna offer me? 4 plates and the eldritch power to hold in a fart? Even before I remixed it, the Nagash scene strikes a chord in a way that Primarch de jure is offered Chaos Creatine, personally doesn't. Nagash sees your anxiety, your alienation, and offers you a way out. Might be revealing a bit about myself there. Ha ha ha. Don't worry, it's all satire anyway. There's a lot I could say about this scene, but I've gone pretty long, and I'm sure the themes speak for themselves. Point is, the background writers did a good job with the Stormcast, laying a solid foundation for both internal and external conflict. This video was an introductory look at the Stormcast, which I hope was useful for those new to AOS. We've touched on a bit of philosophy, both consonantal and forge-analytic. That stuff is relevant context, but it's the existential angle I find most appealing. When it comes to adding edge to your story's supposed goodies, you wouldn't ordinarily expect that to manifest as a ticking time bomb of Bergman-esque identity crisis and increasing antipathy to a continued existence, would you? I say supposed because the Beastclaw Raiders are the actual goodies of AOS. Sure, Games Workshop fiction doesn't always execute concepts well, but Soul Wars manages it pretty alright, and some other novels have delved into related themes as well. As AOS matures, I'm sure you'll find authors getting better at fulfilling this potential. Or maybe they all just glom on to the amnesia angle. I can't say I'm that hyped for Borncast Eternals. There, that's my video about little plastic people. Maybe next time you titter at the burnished pectorals of those silly Sigmarines, you'll remember Porthas, his potatoes, maybe even wonder how he's doing.
Don't fail me now. Take me to the finish line. Oh, my heart, it breaks every step that I take. But I'm open at the gates. They'll tell me that you're mine. It's like I told you, honey. Don't make me sad, don't make me cry. Sometimes life is not enough and the road gets tough, I don't know why. Come and take a walk on the outside, let me kiss you hard in the pouring rain. You like your girls insane, so choose your last words, this is the last time. 'Cause you and I, we would wanna die.
Special thanks to Dawn, the other half of this channel, for helping me out with this video. Dawn personally wrote all the bits you disagree with, so that's who you should DM if you have any problems. If you enjoyed this video and want more, please smash COVID canisters to keep the quarantine going, because clearly this is the product of severe seclusion. No, don't actually do that. That was satire. 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 It's a pun. Do you get it? This joke is the only reason I...